Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Teaching About Elections webinar. It's great to have you all here tonight. We're going to start by going over the agenda. So we're going to start with introductions and an overview of the agenda. Then we're going to talk about some deliberations that we have that deal with teaching about elections and some different ways you might do deliberations. We're going to talk about case study methods and the many case summaries we have that deal with elections. We'll talk about the lessons we have, and we'll focus in on a gerrymandering lesson. And then we're going to talk about resources for at-home learning, since we know many of you are virtual or in hybrid situations. We'll have some Q&A, and then we'll talk about keeping in touch with street law. These are the outcomes we hope we'll be able to say that we accomplished today by the end of the day. So these are, we're going to share our street law resources, and specifically those that I just outlined: deliberations, case study methods, and some lessons. So we are, Jen and I, who will be your primary presenters tonight, are the Street Law's Teacher Professional Development and Programs Curriculum team. So Ben, who was also here with us today as tech support, will drop our emails into the chat box. If you don't know where the chat box is, you're probably familiar by now, but it should be on the bottom toolbar. Looks like a little quote. So please feel free to email us if questions arise during tonight's seminar. If you need tech help, Ben has added to his name, Ben Marks Tech Support, and please feel free in chat to reach out to him and let him know that you need some help. So a lot of you may be familiar with street law, but if you haven't participated with us before, we are street law. That is our mission statement that you can see ahead of us. We have almost 50 years experience developing programs and curricula that teach young people about the law and how to use it as a positive force in their lives. We do work in 5 areas. We do teacher professional development, legal community partnerships, legal life skills, global law and democracy programs, and curricula and teaching materials. Whoops. Sorry, I'm not controlling the screen at the moment. One more. There we go. So one of the things that we've done just recently is develop this web page about teaching about elections. So Ben will drop the link there. In lieu of sending you these materials or putting a link to materials, you can find everything that we're going to talk about today on this Teaching About Elections webpage. In fact, there'll be many more resources there that we can even talk about today. So as we talk about the resources, if you want to take that URL right now and put it in, you can access them while we're talking about them, or you can check them out a little later. So to participate in today's webinar, we have several different ways. You can use the Q&A function to leave questions. And when you go to leave a question, you can check out the other questions. And if you're curious about that question as well, or if it's very similar to your own question, you can upvote it. And when we get to the Q&A part of the presentation, we will take some time to make sure we answer the most upvoted questions. We'll use the chat, so to practice using the chat and so we can see who all is here tonight. If you could, in the chat, put your name and your school, and if you want to put what courses you teach, we would love to be able to see who's in the audience, see if there are some familiar names, and meet those of you who we haven't met before. When you go to use the chat, of course, You should check to see who you're chatting to. So you can chat just to the panelists. So particularly if you're having technical issues, you can chat just to the panelists. You can chat to an individual. But if you want everyone to see it when you're introducing yourself, please select panelists and participants. The other way you can participate is to raise your hand to ask a verbal question, and we'll get Ben to take you off mute so you're able to do that. So I can see the chat filling up. Great. Excellent. So in tonight's seminar, we're also going to use an app called Poll Everywhere that you may or may not be familiar with. But we are going to ask you to log into that after you drop your name into the chat. So to do that, the best way to do it is the option on the left of your screen now, to do it through an internet browser. So if you open up an internet browser, either another window on your laptop or on your cell phone, that's the best way to do it. Ben will drop the Poll Everywhere URL, but you can also just go by putting in pollev.com as it says on the screen, and then entering Street Law Inc. 431 with no spaces. If you don't have access to an internet browser, but you do have your phone, you can use the text message. So not all of the functions work as well on your phone if you're doing it by text message. So if you can do it by internet browser, that would be the best. So Ben has, it's kind of in there with everybody's name, so it's a little hard to see, but Ben Marks just dropped the Poll Everywhere URL. So if you could open that up, but then if you could just hold off on answering anything for a moment, if there is a place for you to put an answer, because we're going to talk about some specific directions, just a moment. So, and again, if you're having trouble accessing Poll Everywhere, it's not a big deal. You can participate by dropping what we're going to ask you to do in a moment just in the chat box. So you can just use the chat if you're uncomfortable with Poll Everywhere, or if it won't work right for you. It's not a big deal. Or you can message Ben Marks and ask him about how to get it working. Okay, so please just take a moment before you do this to listen. We're going to do a word cloud, but word clouds really only work if you only use one word. So we're going to ask you to finish the sentence. One thing I hope my students learn about elections this fall by putting in one word. So you can hyphenate if you need to. So if electoral college is the one thing you want them to learn, you can do electoral hyphen college, even though we know it's not normally hyphenated. Once you put in your first word, which you can do now as that I've given that instruction, once you've put in your first word, you can also amplify other people's responses. So if you see one that you think would be a great answer that you hadn't thought of before, you can put in the same answer written the same way, and it'll make that word bigger, just like it would in a regular word cloud. So we're asking you to do this for a couple reasons. We want to, this is great as it populates, we want to see what the materials we already have that we can call to your attention that can meet this need, but we also want to identify what we might make new materials for. If there's something in here that a lot of people feel like they need, but we don't already have in our materials, we can make some effort to try to meet that need. So you'll be helping us out in two ways. Great. Good. So importance is the most important. That's fantastic. So we'll take a couple more minutes to see where this shakes out. Looks like the Electoral College is pretty important, which is great because we're going to talk about that a lot tonight. Democracy, the role of the media. That's a great one. It's interesting to see how it changes once people start to amplify other answers. Great. So it looks like electoral college, democracy, importance, the importance of elections, democracy, how it fits in the larger scheme of democracy, polling, that's excellent. Mail-in voting, that's a hot issue this time. Okay, so if you would put in your final answers. Looks like no one's putting them in the chat, so hopefully that's a good sign that Poll Everywhere is working well for people. Great. Okay, so Jen, can you freeze that? Awesome. Whoops. There we go. Great. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Jen, who will introduce herself and talk about deliberations.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about those glitches earlier. That was me learning that I shouldn't play with my computer while Cathy's controlling my screen. For my section, I want to talk a little bit more about deliberations. I hope that some folks have done street laws deliberations who are here with us today, but I hope that we've got a bunch of people who've never heard of them before too, so that we can kind of spread the good word about deliberation. So to start, I just want to share what a deliberation is. So traditionally, the deliberation methodology, which is based on structured academic controversy, if you're familiar with that, is used as a classroom discussion protocol that allows students to explore multiple sides of a contested issue and search for consensus cooperatively, so a little bit different from a debate. We think that through this discussion though this discussion strategy is best done in person, elements of it can be done during kind of the emergency remote learning time that many of us are in right now. So this slide shows us what a deliberation looks like under ideal circumstances. There are 8 steps, as you can see. It starts with an introduction, much like many of the lessons that we teach on a daily basis, with what are we doing, why are we doing it, and what kind of rules and expectations should we set for ourselves as we do this. And then the next step is to go through a careful reading. Street Laws developed, I think at this point, maybe 12 to 16 readings around topics on contested political issues. So the next step, number 2, is for students to do the reading. And then number 3, after the reading, to clarify that reading and make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page about what the topic is, key vocabulary, that kind of thing, before students move into steps 4, 5, and 6, which is done in small groups typically. So certainly step 3 is important because students are then going to take that learning and go into small groups that may be a little bit more challenging to monitor. Then in step 4, students move into their small groups. Small groups tend to be like 4 to 6 people. And in those small groups, the small groups split even further with one pair taking the yes side, one pair taking the no side. Pairs find some arguments from the reading to support their side and present those arguments to the other pair in their small group, who'll do the same thing. So basically you've got the yeses and the nos, just picking out what they think the best arguments are, sharing with one another, keeping crosstalk kind of to a minimum because there's time for more lively conversation later. This is all done with a purpose to build relationships initially and just get some of the facts out there before moving into maybe the more contested discussion. So step 5 is then students reverse positions. If they started on the yes side, they're now on the no side with their partners. They're still starting by pulling out 2 arguments. We suggest that one of those 2 arguments be a kind of validation of an argument that the other side presented in step 4. So we really liked this argument that you guys presented, and here's why we really liked it. After the 2 sides reverse and share materials from the other side, or arguments from the other side. Then comes step 6. Step 6 is where students now are still in their small groups, but they're not really working with their partners anymore. And they're having a free discussion about the topic with the aim to find consensus, or at the very least to search for consensus, to look for some areas of common ground. So after giving enough time, sometimes an uncomfortably long amount of time for that discussion, because sometimes in the uncomfortable moments, good stuff comes out of those conversations. Then in step 7, the whole group comes back together to do discussion, reflection, and think about both the content, what students have learned, but also the process of deliberation. And finally, in step 8, students kind of circle back to self-assess, how did things go, what would they do differently next time, and to give the teacher feedback, because hopefully you're going to do a deliberation again, so students can let you know what things went well and what things they might want to see differently for next time. So generally, as we're thinking about transitioning deliberation materials to at-home learning, it's a good idea to maintain whenever possible the big goals of deliberative discussion, which are that it's multi-sided, that it's cooperative, and that it's consensus-driven. So even if you can't follow these 8 steps exactly as they're written, as you adapt it to kind of keep these things in mind as you use the materials, as you have students have conversations about these topics. So next I want to share with you what the materials are that we have around deliberations, and specifically materials related to election time. So all of our deliberations have these materials all in one kind of topic pack. So each pack is going to have a lesson guide that's pretty short, but that will give a good overview for you of how to run a deliberation. Each pack will have a reading, a glossary, some additional quotes that aren't from the reading, a visual, and some suggested resources as well. And so these are the topics that we have for deliberations right now, and we are always adding new topics, especially at teachers' suggestion, at students' suggestion. So if you have any suggestions, if your students have any suggestions about topics they'd like to see, certainly email me, and I'd love to hear from you and from your students about what they'd like to talk about. But the 3 that are highlighted are probably best suited for election season in the kind of more general sense. So one is, should voting be compulsory? Conversations, deliberations that I've observed that students have had around this topic have ended up talking about voter turnout, about voter registration, about kind of globally what different countries do when it comes to voting, because compulsory voting, although it doesn't exist here, it does exist in several other countries, and there's research connected to compulsory voting. So it's a great conversation for students to have, especially toward the beginning of the year when they're getting to know each other, and you may not want to embark on a really, really hotly contested topic. The MSHS that's next to it means that we have 2 versions. We have a middle school version that's shorter, that's written at about an 8th grade reading level, maybe a little bit lower than that. And then we have a high school version that's written at about a 10th to 11th grade reading level. We also have a deliberation that's pretty new, and we'd love feedback on it, about whether the Electoral College should be abolished. And we have a deliberation that's also pretty new, that's less about a policy topic, but more about a conversation that could lead to policy topics, and that's whether the United States democracy is a healthy democracy. And so we have an accompanying lesson that goes with that as well, that goes over the signposts of democracy. Would be a great thing to talk about right now, just given kind of the state of democracy in the world. And then you can see the rest of the deliberation topics that are currently available. As you know, during an election season, all sorts of different topics can come up and can come into play. And so these are just a reminder to keep these things in mind. You know, should your students want to talk about them, should they connect to the election season in some way? I'd love in the chat for folks who are thinking about using a deliberation, think about which deliberation topic you think your students might be most interested in during this election season, and let us know. Let us know what topic you think your students might be interested in and maybe why they might be interested in it. And that might spark some thought from someone else. So go ahead and put some of your thoughts into the chat box. Make sure that you hit all panelists and attendees so that other attendees can see how you're responding as well. So I wanted to show you some of these materials just so that you kind of can preview them. This is the start to our Electoral College reading. These readings tend to range from 4 to 8 pages. They're double spaced. As you can see, they've got line numbers to them. They all follow a similar format with a hook, an introduction, background information, and arguments from either side. Each topic set also has a visual with some corresponding questions. So it may be best to have students do the reading beforehand, but ultimately you'll be the best judge of that. But each visual has a set of questions that goes with it. The questions are scaffolded, as you can see from this example in compulsory voting, where we've got just some kind of basic questions to start about interpreting the visual. And then we've got some extension kind of creation analysis questions moving forward. We've got, like I said, quotations that are not in the reading, but are additional quotations. So here are the first 2 quotations that we have for the democracy, the healthy democracy reading. And we also have suggested resources that go with each of these. So if, for example, you want to teach the Electoral College deliberation, you may want to do a pre-lesson about the Electoral College, or you may want to follow it up, do an extension. So there are several different resources. As you can see, one of those resources is a 5-minute TED Ed video. That could be the type of thing you assign students for homework, and then they come into the deliberation with that additional information. So all of these materials that I just mentioned are available on Street Law Store. Store is in quotation marks because it doesn't function the way that a typical store does. Everything that you're hearing about tonight is free in Street Law Store. The link, as you can see, is right there, and Ben just put it in the chat. So one reason why we have this slide set up the way that we do is we want to very clearly show you that even though you're going to be asked to check out, and it may look like you're being asked to put in billing information, you will not have to put in any sort of payment information. So just as a heads up, you won't have to do any of that stuff. It is easiest if you're going to download materials from Street Law to probably have a login, just because it makes that process a little bit more functional and easy. So I'll return toward the end of our webinar to share a little bit more about Street Law resources and how you can stay in touch with us.
Great. So another great student-centered interactive way to teach about elections is by using our hundreds of case summaries to make up our 7 case study methods. So we're going to talk about them in general now, and then we're going to participate in one. So in our store that Jen just talked about, we have hundreds of free case summaries. Each case summary is created with at least these 5 elements. Many also have a background section for things that need a little more scaffolding. For instance, the case we're about to talk about has a whole page of information on how the Electoral College functions so that students can understand the case. We think of these elements as ingredients used in a recipe. So they can be combined in different ways to make up the 7 case study methods that we'll talk about later. Each case summary is downloadable as a Word document so that you can cut and paste the different elements to create whatever activity you want your students to engage in. So today we're going to talk about 2 cases, really focus on one, but that were argued and decided at the end of last term. So these are newly decided cases. Chiafalo v. Washington. Sometimes it's called Chiafalo because the Chief Justice mispronounced Brett Chiafalo's name. So if the Chief Justice says it that way, it's the way it's going to be known. But Chiafalo v. Washington and Colorado v. Baca. These cases could potentially have a huge impact on the 2020 presidential election. Both cases dealt with whether a state can require, and sometimes this is called bind, their electors to vote the way the general election came out. So we've called the electors who choose to vote in a way other than the way the general election comes out, faithless electors. And so these cases together have been known as the faithless electors cases. They were argued separately, but on the same day, back to back. But the Supreme Court did issue just one opinion in both cases. So in these pictures, you can see Levi Guerrera on the left. She was an elector from the state of Washington. She was only 19 at the time of the election, so just a little older than our students. Brett Chiafalo, also circled in that picture, and then Esther John. These were the three electors in Washington that make up the petitioners in this case, even though the case is only known by the name of Chiafalo. It's really all three of them. And Ben will drop that link if he hasn't already. This takes you to our SCOTUS in the Classroom page that features all of these current cases. So we're going to use this case, the Chiafalo v. Washington case, to demonstrate how you can use these cases to teach about how the Electoral College functions. So this case, and this slide, I'm going to kind of walk through what you would do with your students to give the background of the case of Chiafalo v. Washington. So the state of Washington has 12 electoral votes, and those votes come from the fact that they have 10 representatives in the House of Representatives and, of course, 2 senators, and that's how we decide how many electoral votes a state has. So in the summer before the election, both parties choose electors who will cast votes in the Electoral College if their party's candidate wins the general election in the state of Washington. So in the state of Washington, so there's our 12 blue Democratic electors and our 12 red Republican electors just waiting around all summer to see if they're going to get to play their part. In the state of Washington, by law, electors have to take an oath that they will vote for the person who wins in the general. If they don't, they can be fined up to $1,000, and they know that. It's part of the oath. So in November, of course, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November is the general election. And on that day, all the Washingtonians come out and they cast their ballots. So in 2016, when this case takes place, the Clinton-Kaine ticket won with 54.4% of the votes. And that should mean that the 12 blue electors we chose in the summer are going to get to go to the state capital of Olympia and vote. But what happens is in December, when we go to make those votes, is our 3 petitioners, Chiafalo, Guerrera, and John, decide to vote for Colin Powell. And they choose 3 separate vice presidential candidates, but they all do vote for Colin Powell. And they cast their ballot by mail, as electors do. And when they do that, they get fined $1,000. But their votes were sent to the Senate to be counted. So in January, the President of the Senate, also known as the Vice President of the United States, gets to count the electoral votes. Their votes were among those and were counted. And of course, if a candidate receives 270 electoral votes, that person becomes president. If they don't, the election is thrown into the House of Representatives, where each state gets 1 vote. That is precisely what our petitioners wanted to do. They wanted to get enough electors to come together and pledge to vote to cast their votes for candidates other than Clinton or Trump, to make sure that President Trump was denied his 270 electoral votes in the Electoral College. So that was their reasoning, their self-professed reasoning for voting for another candidate, to try to get a groundswell of electors to do the same in order to deny Trump the presidency. So there are 538 votes, and here are the handful of voters who voted for a candidate other than Trump or Clinton. So history shows us, and the numbers here show us, that that wasn't enough to deny Trump his 270 electoral votes, and therefore he became president. So the other case that we're going to talk about, Baca v. Colorado, Michael Baca tried to vote for a candidate other than Clinton, who won his state of Colorado. But instead of having his vote cast, like in this case, and being fined, he was actually replaced. They brought in another elector. He was just ignored. He actually was sitting in the room trying to cast a vote. But they brought in another elector, gave them the ballot, and allowed them to cast their vote. So in the votes that are circled there, you don't see Mr. Baca's vote, but he still challenged the right of the state of Colorado to replace him as an elector. So we're going to leave the story of these two cases here for just a moment, but we will come back, I promise. To talk about the 7 case study methods. So these methods range from the pretty simple, like the anatomy of a case, and that is that's an activity where you take the case summary and take out the names of those elements, the labels, and have your students just recognize these are the arguments for this side, these are the arguments for that side, this is the decision. This is probably done best when you're first introducing the court to your students, maybe the first time they ever work with a case summary. They go all the way up to the pretty elaborate and in-depth moot court or mini moot court. All of these activities can be described in a lot more detail in a document that Ben has either dropped he already did drop the link to, and that is, we call it Using Case Studies in the Classroom. And it will walk you through all 7 of these activities and tell you exactly how to take that downloadable Word document and use the different elements to make these activities. Today, we're going to go right in the middle and look at an activity called classifying arguments, and then briefly at an extension you might do with it called judicial opinion writing. So I'm sure some of you are face-to-face, and for those of you who are face-to-face, or maybe those of you who would think about doing this classic classifying argument activities as maybe a Google Doc, one way to engage students with the arguments, in this case from Chiafalo v. Washington, is to have them look at the arguments taken out of their categories of arguments for the petitioner and arguments for the respondents. Really have to get into them and see which side does this argument support. So in sort of the classic handout version of this activity, you can see that students would be reading, for instance, voting for their choice of candidate is part of petitioner's core First Amendment freedoms, and the Washington state law is a violation of this right. And they would think to themselves, is that supporting Chiafalo, the elector, or is that supporting Washington? So this is one way to do it, and again, pretty easily adaptable to a Google Doc. But we're going to try something a little more adventurous. We're going to try a competition using Poll Everywhere. So if you have polleverywhere.com still open on your device, please go back to it, or if you need to reopen it, Ben will drop the link again. It's the same link. And we're going to use it to take a look at the arguments and decide whether or not these arguments are helping Chiafalo or Washington, just like you would on the handout, but in a little more interactive way. So I'll just give people sort of a moment to get back into Poll Everywhere. Okay, so in a moment, we're gonna do the Poll Everywhere competition. And so what will happen is first you'll see the argument come up on the screen, and you'll have some time to read it. You're not being asked to do anything with it yet. So you can read, maybe not leisurely, but you don't have to read as quickly as you possibly can. And then I'll click it and it will go to a slide that will have that same argument. It'll look a little bit differently, but you'll have the same argument, and then down below it, you'll vote for whether it supports Chiafalo or whether it supports Washington. And it does record your time, so you get more points the quicker your response. So it's kind of preferable that when you read the argument on the first slide, that you sort of already decide who you're going to vote for. So we'll move on to the first argument. Okay, so I'll give you a moment to read that argument and think about if it helps Chiafalo, the elector, or the state of Washington. Okay, I'm going to go to the next screen and you'll be able to cast your vote. I am not seeing the results coming in. Jen, do you have any idea?
They'll show up on the next slide.
Okay. Okay, the timer isn't working, so I'm going to go on to the next slide and see if it worked. There we go. Okay, so most people got it right. That definitely helps the electors. And we will see on the next slide our leaderboard. Oh, lots of people were super fast. Okay, I won't give you quite as long to read the arguments this time then. I think that means it was just too easy. We have to adjust our instruction, right, for our students. You guys are rock star students. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one where you can cast your vote. Oh, the timer's working this time, so you only have 15 seconds to record your answer. Great, and this argument helped the state of Washington. A little foreshadowing, you might want to take a look at this argument, and then nothing in the Constitution stops states from conditioning appointment on pledging to follow the voters' will. Okay, new leaderboard, still lots of people in first place. We'll speed up a little bit, see if we can't shake it up a little bit. Okay, I'm moving on to the voting screen. In 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay, also helping Washington, that it's the repercussions of allowing electors to vote using their own discretion and what that might mean for faith in elections. See if that shook up the leaderboard at all. Oh, no, you guys are good. Okay, and argument 4. I see some people are having trouble getting their votes in. That's okay. You can feel free to put it in the chat if it's not working on poll everywhere. Okay, you're gonna be asked to put in your response. Great, you guys are great at this. And we probably still have a lot of people in first place. Well, you can all feel very good for being in first place. And I don't know how to scroll down, but I'm guessing there's probably a lot more people as well. Great, so this is just a little taste of something that you might want to do with your students. Of course, technology is always tricky. Another option when you're back to being face-to-face is to take the arguments and cut them into strips and have students then put them in, you know, the left-hand column for Chiafalo, the right-hand column for Washington. And the beauty of this is that after they're done classifying the arguments, they can put them in order of most compelling at the top to least compelling at the bottom. And then if you're going to do something like a moot court afterwards, you can have them either tape them to a piece of paper, which is old school, or take a photo with their cell phone, which is probably what they'd really do, and then use those arguments to structure their arguments for the case. This is just a sampling of the cases that we have for you on that Teaching About Elections website. There are many, many more. If you want to focus on some other aspect of elections other than the Electoral College, like some of the other ones that you saw in the word cloud, one of the things I noticed was campaign finance. On that, in the website, these cases are organized in different categories: redistricting and gerrymandering, voting laws and polling places, campaign finance legislation, and then the Electoral College. So you have lots of options if you would like to do a case study but want to focus on some other aspect of elections. Like I said in the document, using case studies in the classroom that Ben dropped before, it will walk you through how to make these activities. You know, you download it as a Word document, you cut off the decision and the opinions, you randomize the arguments, and you either copy it or post it on your as a Google Doc. So it's very easy to make a classifying arguments activity out of any of those many cases. And as an extension, you might want to, after you've had your students classify the arguments, use our You Be the Justice judicial opinion writing activity, and Ben will drop that link as well, to figure out how the case should be decided. So once we have classified the arguments, who has the most compelling arguments and how should it be decided? So that's just a logical extension of this, of the classifying arguments activity. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to do that tonight, but I won't leave you hanging. I will tell you what the Supreme Court decided in Chiafalo v. Washington and Baca v. Colorado. In a unanimous decision, the court found for the state of Washington and Colorado, and I gave you that foreshadowing of the one argument, they found basically that nothing in the text of the Constitution expressly prohibits a state from restricting the votes of their electors. And that's what the decision hinged on. There's a whole lesson about redistricting and gerrymandering, and we don't have time to go into it in depth, but we did want you to know that it's there. And it's written in a very almost sub-friendly way that it walks you through all of the steps. So it has 5 different steps that you can see there, a couple of which I'm going to talk about now, just as a brief overview. So the first thing this lesson does is gets your students to know the vocabulary about redistricting, so that districts should be compact and contiguous, what it means to gerrymander a district, and 2 specific types of gerrymandering that come up in a lot of standards, that is packing and cracking. Then it allows your students to take that vocabulary and immediately put it into practice by using these maps to show non-gerrymandered districts, packed districts, and cracked districts. So they might do something like this. This is my kind of ugly drawing, but you know, these are not gerrymandered districts because they're compact and contiguous. This is a packed district because the minority party is all pushed into one, or mostly pushed into one district, leaving the other ones safe for the majority party. And these are cracked districts where the minority party is cracked up into all the districts, so they can't win any of the districts. This lesson culminates in a quiz that you can do. You know, you can do it with something else too, but I always, when I was in the classroom, did it with kisses right before the winter holidays. And they used those kisses to show packing, cracking, and not gerrymandered districts. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Jen, who's going to talk about street law resources for at-home learning.
All right, so last year when the pandemic started and schools transitioned to emergency remote learning, street law took some time to think about how our resources could transfer to that time. We got a lot of feedback from teachers about how they were using our materials, and we've collected those resources and those suggestions along with a couple of the webinar recordings that we did during that time, all on this page. And Ben is going to add that link to the chat here in a moment. But so Cathy today talked about a bunch of different strategies for the case studies, for example. And many of those strategies we've considered. How would you adapt this for remote learning? So you'd go to this page and you could scroll to find case study strategies. You could scroll to find how you might adapt deliberations to remote learning. If you end up doing something unique, we would love to hear about it, because other teachers, as you know, would be grateful to know how they can take your ideas and use them with their students as well. So one of the last kind of major things that we're going to do, second to last thing we're going to do, is take some time to just give you a chance to ask questions about any of the resources we've talked about today, any of the strategies that we've talked about today, any questions that you have about teaching elections, and we'll try our best to answer them. Certainly, as we're answering them, if anyone wants to chime in with their own thoughts in the chat, make sure that you hit all panelists and attendees as you chime in with your thoughts. But in order to participate in this Q&A section, there are a couple different ways that you can do that. One is you can click the Q&A button that's on the kind of black Zoom navigation bar, and you can ask a question. And I've got 2 questions so far that we will answer here in a moment. We've got 3 now. You can also use the chat to ask questions. And hopefully Ben or Cathy can amplify those questions as they come up. And then finally, if you have a question that you'd like to ask verbally, we'll probably answer these first 3 questions that are queued up in the Q&A, but then we'll leave some space for that as well. In order to do that, on the black Zoom toolbar, you'll hit raise hand, and when we're ready, we'll be able to give you the unmute option to ask your question. So one easy question to answer is, will this be available for review later? We are recording this webinar right now, and usually it takes maybe like a day, day and a half to 2 days turnaround time to be able to get the recording up and available. But yes, it will be available, and we will post it on our website. for you to be able to review. Street Law also has a YouTube page. You can watch all of our past webinars there. And then Lucas asked a question that I can answer right now before I turn it over to Cathy. How long should a deliberation take in a typical high school class? That's a great question, Lucas. And as so many people maybe hate to hear, it depends. I'd say if you're doing steps 1 through 8 all in one class period, if that's your goal, it may take 60 to 90 minutes to do all that, kind of depending on how long the reading is, how engaged your students are in the conversation. You know, I've seen some deliberations take even longer than that because students really want to have the conversations, and you don't really want to take time away from their desire to have those conversations. But you can also split those 8 steps up. So I've seen some teachers who have done the first several steps, the kind of preparation steps in a previous class, as kind of previous class plus homework, having students read the reading ahead of time, and then just doing a quick review. So it kind of depends. You can certainly email me if you want some more specifics, some more ways that you might go through it. My email is jwheeler@streetlaw.org. Cathy, I'll turn it over to you.
This is a question about how the electors are chosen by the parties in each state. Yeah, not only does it vary by state, but it can vary by party within the state. And so generally it's, you know, an honor to be chosen as elector, and the people are chosen based on, you know, their commitment to the party or something that they've done that makes the party sort of want to reward them by naming them as electors. That might be financial contributions or may not be. I don't think parties generally disclose why they choose their electors. But one of the consequences of this decision may be that parties are much more careful about who they select as their electors. You know, or maybe they won't be, because now that they have to vote the way that the general election goes, they won't have any discretion, so it won't matter. So yeah, so it does definitely vary by state and by party within the state. Jen, do you want to take the poll everywhere?
Yeah, sure.
You're much more familiar with poll everywhere than I am.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief just because it's not exactly the focus of this webinar, but it certainly may be information that folks want to use. So Poll Everywhere is a free software for up to, or not even software, app, I guess, that folks can use for up to 25 responses for free. You can create a bunch of different types of questions. So we use the word cloud, the competition, multiple choice questions, and you really can do it for any subject. You get to create the questions. So again, if you want to email me, I'm happy to share the way that we kind of walk through that when we create them and some different ways that we've been able to use it. It's a pretty great tool for us.
Yeah, I can't find a way to dismiss Lucas's question. There we go, it's gone. Okay, and in Shelby v. Holder, what is it that Congress has to do to activate pre-clearance again? You know, I'm not really sure of the answer to that question. I do know that Shelby v. Holder, the decision in that case basically says that the Voting Rights Act is imposing too many restrictions and that it's no longer necessary, and that states don't have to get pre-clearance. And of course, the immediate aftermath was that was a lot of states changed their voting procedures, including requiring IDs, you know, several other state restrictions that came out in the immediate aftermath of Shelby v. Holder.
I think that might be about time for us to wrap up questions, but Ben, if you could drop our emails again in the chat so that folks can reach out if they have any additional questions. we're going to move into the last few slides. So the next slide is, before we get to kind of how you can keep in touch with us, we have created a special section in our street law store that has several different categories, but we basically collected the resources related to teaching elections in the store. Again, all of these resources are free for you to use, and so you can go into the store and find these resources in that way as well. And there are some other ways that you can keep in touch with us via social media. We have a Facebook page, we have a Twitter account, we have an educator newsletter. Ben's going to drop the link to include for you to be able to sign up for the educator newsletter. And this educator newsletter will alert you about upcoming webinars, about new resources. It's maybe one of the best ways to stay in touch with us. Our Supreme Court Summer Institute the application for the Supreme Court Summer Institute is going to go live soon. So we can pause. I can pause for a moment, Kathy, if you want to take maybe a minute or two to talk about SCSI.
Yeah, just that one of the reasons to keep in touch with us is because you can find out about things like this. So on the first day of the court, which is always the first Monday in October, it's the day that we make our applications available for the Supreme Court Summer Institute. So you can see the 2 weeks that the Institute will happen this year. They happen during the last 2 weeks of the court, because that hopefully ensures that we'll get to hear some great decisions if the court is handing down decisions live again by June. And they are 6-day intensive studies of the Supreme Court. We have amazing Supreme Court scholars who come and talk to us, members of the media, and it culminates with, usually, if the world gets back to normal, in going to the court to hear decisions handed down. If you follow the court, you know that a lot of times the blockbuster decisions are handed down on the very last days of decisions. So we generally hear some really big cases. And so hopefully you'll apply. If you have questions about applications, feel free to reach out to me and I can answer any questions that you have about the Institute itself or about applications.
And then that's it for us. So like I said before, this webinar will be available as a recording on our website, on our YouTube channel. Our materials that we talked about today are available at that link. And then those are our email addresses if you have any questions that you'd like for us to answer. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We hope to see you at another webinar in the future. We hope to see your name show up in the SCSI applications. And good luck this year. Let us know how we can help you.